Hello. Welcome all to New Hampshire Peace Actions, Peace and Justice Conversation Series. In case you're new to our organization, New Hampshire Peace Action educates, mobilizes, and organizes to build a more peaceful and just future for all. We envisage a future where international relations are based on cooperation instead of competition and conflict, and where mutual benefit and shared security lead to a more peaceful and just global community. The corona pandemic spurred us to start this bi-weekly conversation series as a way to continue our public education work once we couldn't be together. But we found it so effective for reaching out that we've decided to continue on indefinitely. This bi-weekly online conversation series is intended to help us engage and sort out how to make the changes we've been yearning for. In the spirit of understanding and respect, we want to open by acknowledging that we're doing our work here in New Hampshire on the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples, past and present. And we honor with gratitude the land and waterways that they have been stewarding throughout the generations. So tonight, I'm excited to introduce an old friend, Jose Vasquez, and a new friend, Naveed Shah, who work with Common Defense, which is the largest organization of progressive veterans in the country. And tonight they're here to talk to us a little bit about why they organize with veterans and how they organize with veterans and how that works. So I don't want to spend too long talking, so I'm going to turn it over to Jose or Naveed, whoever wants to open up. Give us a little talk, and then we'll move into Q&A when you're done.
Thanks a lot, Will, and thanks, Amy, for hosting us tonight. My name is Jose Vasquez. I'm the executive director at Common Defense. Happy to reconnect with Will after several years and share a little bit about the work that myself and Naveed and the rest of the Common Defense team does on a regular basis. The first thing I'll say is in terms of my military service, I was in the Army from 1992 to 07. I left as a conscientious objector, which is a long story, and happy to take questions about that. But the short answer is I felt like the wars in Iraq and later in Afghanistan were unjust, and I could no longer serve in that institution. So I've been doing veteran organizing work since about 2005. I was an active member of Iraq Vets Against the War, as well as a lifetime member of Vets for Peace. And I bring a lot of those experiences into this work with Common Defense. As Will said, we're a national progressive veterans organization. We're structured as a 501c4, 501c3 training program and issue-based campaign work. And then we also have a political action committee so we can endorse candidates, which is a lot of the work that Naveed does as our political director. So that's just a quick introduction to us. We're national in scope. We've got members in all 50 states and many of the U.S. territories. We focus on a wide range of issues, but primarily we got our start opposing Trump and his run for office. We initially started as a hashtag on social media, just using the hashtag Vets versus Hate. And from there, we sort of rolled into forming the PAC so that we could remain compliant while opposing Trump when he was still on the campaign trail. Since then, we've done multiple campaigns, including the End the Forever War campaign, where we pressured elected officials who were running for office to sign a pledge saying that they would bring the war to a responsible and expedient end. And that language, the End the Forever War, made its way into the Democratic platform, during the Biden's run for office. So we were excited to see that. Of course, there's a lot to say about the end of the Afghanistan war and the messiness that happened there, but ultimately we're pleased to see that the Biden administration, had the courage to bring the troops home. It's something that I personally have been working on since about 2004, 2005. So it was really powerful to see that war finally come to an end. Obviously, our work is not done. We want to do right by the Afghan people, and Naveed can say a lot more about what we're doing regarding the Afghan Adjustment Act and ensuring that those Afghan civilians who worked alongside the U.S. forces are taken care of when they get here. Obviously, lots of folks were not able to escape the Taliban regime, and we want to continue to track the situation there and do what we can to advocate for a kind of just transition, although it's very difficult with the current government that they have there. Obviously, other things that we've done as an organization, we've worked on healthcare issues. When there was a possibility of a repeal of the Obamacare, the ACA, we mobilized vets around that. Currently, we're working on a Vets for Democracy campaign, as well as just beginning to launch a Vets for Climate Justice program. So we're a multi-issue, multi-generational, multiracial organization, and happy to connect with our friends and allies in New Hampshire Peace Action. So I'll pass it over to Naveed to introduce himself and say a little bit about the political work that we do.
Thanks, Jose. Good evening, everybody. My name is Naveed Shah. I'm the political director of Common Defense. I'm an Army veteran, and I served in Iraq in 2009 and 10. I've been doing this veterans advocacy work since about 2012. And the reason I really got involved in the first place was because I saw how our fellow veterans came home from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and struggled to just get the basic benefits that they needed to get healthcare and jobs and education, that a lot of which was promised to them when they enlisted. Sorry, I'm just getting over a little cold, but this is something that I saw more and more, was so many of our veterans were suffering and trying to just get the basics that they had been promised. And consistently it was the idea that we signed on the dotted line and went overseas, many of us, and even those who didn't put their lives on the line in many other ways here at home, and come home to find out that our the things that were promised just weren't there, just weren't going to be there. And then I also found that there are many things that, sure, veterans in many cases deserve and need certain specialized care and carve outs and other things like the GI Bill, which are good exceptions to some rules. But why is it that healthcare is only available if you are willing to go serve your country? Why is it that an education is only available if you're willing to go serve your country? Why isn't, by virtue of being an American in the richest country in the history of the world, that you still have to struggle to put food on the table, that so many kids are still starving? And so that's what really led me to this movement work, because I felt like there was more that we could do, not just for our veterans and military families, but for all Americans. For every veteran that's on VA healthcare, there are 9 more, or at least 5 more that aren't, right? There for every veteran who has their home loan paid for, there's another veteran who is homeless or in a position to not have housing at the time. And for every military family that is doing well, about 20% of military families who are on active duty are on food stamps or other sorts of public assistance. So when you think about the amount of money that our government spends on defense work, and even on veterans issues, and you look at what the outcome of that has been over the last 20 years of war, you start to see that the picture is not as rosy as it might seem from the outside. And so I really joined this movement because I really wanted to make a difference here, make an impact, because I wanted to make sure, more than anything, that the next generation didn't end up going to serve in a unjust war like I did when I served in Iraq. And so Common Defense's End the Forever War campaign was something that I came to work on and be a part of. And we really had some great successes in that campaign in the very beginning. I'm sure Jose remembers during the 2020 presidential campaign, the presidential primary, I think we got 7 of the Democratic presidential candidates to sign on to our pledge to end the forever war, including Senator Sanders and Senator Warren. And like Jose mentioned, while the ultimate nominee, President Biden, didn't sign the pledge. He, used the same language in the party's platform and in his own platform. And really, it was after the election, more than a year later, when he, after having numerous conversations with his staff, he actually said, "It's time to end this forever war." And that was the headline on the cover of the New York Times, which I have around here somewhere. And that was a huge victory for us, that we were able to make that happen and bring all those folks home. And while we certainly pushed for the withdrawal from Afghanistan, we also pushed just as hard from as soon as we heard about it in March of 2021 that it was going to happen, that we wanted to make sure that the evacuation happened in a manner that made sense. And ultimately it went down the way it did. Decisions were made above our level. And so we know that many of our veterans who served in Afghanistan, and even those who didn't, were invested in making sure that those Afghans who escaped were able to get out from Afghanistan were provided for. We have a motto in the military: leave no man behind, or leave no one behind. And we want to make sure that we continue to fight for that, because every Afghan who risked their lives, whether they served as an interpreter or just worked on the base or did any number of things for the U.S. military, they have a target painted on their back and their families because of their service to us. So that's why even now we're continuing to push for the Afghan Adjustment Act, which is legislation that would essentially make it just easier for Afghans who were able to come here under a program called humanitarian parole, which is supposed to be temporary and run out after a year or two at the most, to allow them to, transition to a regular life, get a job, go to school, pay their bills. That's all they really want to do. And so we're still fighting hard. There's a lot of unfortunate opposition to this legislation because people see it as what it's things that it's not. And that's why we need veterans to speak up, and really everyone to speak about these issues, because at the end of the day, it's a humanitarian crisis for us, but it's also a national security issue. If the U.S. is ever to rely on local forces again anywhere else in the world, we have to show them that we're going to take care of them too. So we try to talk about these things in ways that make sense to folks who aren't in this side of the movement with us. But I know all of you understand where we're coming from and why it's so vital that we, as I like to say, if we are to be the shining city on the hill, then we have to, live up to those values and not just say them. So I'll stop there.
So, can you talk a little bit about your work this election cycle? What has Common Defense been up to? Are there specific races you're working on, and how you're working to put progressive veterans' voices forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing about Common Defense is we don't just endorse candidates who are veterans. In fact, in some cases, we'll endorse a candidate who's not a veteran against a veteran if we think that the candidate that we want to endorse is more aligned with our values as progressives, and as someone who will fight for peace. So our candidates that we endorse around the country, I lost count of how many we endorsed. I think it was somewhere close to 65. We started out, I think we endorsed like 20 the first year, and it's just slowly climbed up and up ever since then. Because there are so many good candidates. It's a good problem to have. There's so many great incumbents as well as challengers who are working hard to try to, make significant progress. Some of them we've seen, who have done really well just in recent years. And then others that we are hoping will do well and come back. So, and then some, we have our own training program called the Veterans Organizing Institute. And we have a veteran named Chris DeLuzio, who's running in Pennsylvania's 17th district outside of Pittsburgh, running for Congress. And he's a graduate of our Veterans Organizing Institute, which is great. So what we're doing in 5 key states: Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. I said 5 because we keep saying 5, but it's actually those 4 right now. And we have organizers on the ground in those states doing the hard work of outreach to, reaching out to other veterans as well as other voters, contacting them in person, by phone, via text, every which way we can. We have carrier pigeons as well, whatever works to get the word out to all of them. And I think I haven't been tracking as closely, but our goal that we set was to reach 1 million voters, and I think we are almost there. I think we're sending text tonight to get there. So yeah,
that's really impressive. Another reason I know that we wanted to have you on, can you, and I want to move to the AUMF in a little bit, but can either you or Jose talk about why you founded Common Defense, what the unfilled niche was there, and why that why that organization was, I mean, you said it was born be kind of out of the Trump race, but what was the niche you were looking to fill when you decided that a new organization was needed?
Yeah, I can start us off there. I will say this. I don't know that we initially envisioned forming an entire national veterans organization, right? I think it was those of us that lived in New York City and knew who Donald Trump was. And, once we learned that he was planning on running for office, and later as it became clear that he might become the front runner, it's just one of those moments in life where you're just like, somebody's got to do something about this. And I feel like lots of people were. And organizing some kind of veteran opposition to his run for office felt really important. And like I said, we started just as a hashtag on social media, right? So it wasn't even really an organization. It was just sort of like, we have an idea about how to mobilize folks using social media, basically getting vets to take pictures of themselves wearing some sort of veteran identifier. And then often they would write, a statement that they would hold up, take a picture, and sort of share that and use the hashtag so we could sort of identify each other. You might remember that back in 2016, Trump skipped one of the national debates because he felt like he wasn't getting a fair shake from the moderators, and said that he was going to host a fundraiser for veterans. Later, the Washington Post reported, when they approached a bunch of the major vets orgs, whether they had received any funds from the Trump administration. And of course, none of the major vets orgs had received a dime. And so he did hold the fundraiser, but he never cut the checks. That story breaking in the Washington Post sort of created an opportunity for us to hold his feet to the fire. And it was still kind of early days in the campaign. So we held a press conference at Trump Tower. There was about 15 to 20 vets there. There's probably twice as many cameras there. And we were able to sort of capture the news cycle for a couple weeks, put vets on a lot of the talking head shows. And I think after that is when we sort of realized, okay, we really got something here, right? We forced the Trump administration or not the administration, I guess the Trump campaign at the time, to respond. We've got video of him at one of his rallies saying, and there were vets outside protesting, and they tried to claim that we were somehow sent there by Hillary Clinton and what have you, but that was not the case. It was just us being so outraged by the fact that he would try to raise money, claiming that he was, doing so to benefit veterans, and then not actually, cut the checks. So of course, later they cut the checks after the story broke and after we held these press conferences. They, donated to various veterans organizations. But, I think that sort of oppositional stance to everything that he was, kind of spewing on the campaign trail, his sort of hate speech, and making an enemy of different constituencies on a pretty much on a daily basis. We just felt pretty strongly that we knew, having done work with veterans before, that this was not where all veterans stood. That there are lots of vets who vote Democratic on a regular basis and certainly wouldn't support a guy like Donald Trump. And and like I said, we initially started as a PAC, right, as a political action committee, which I think is kind of an unusual start to a grassroots organization, but was the vehicle that we needed at the time to sort of dive right into the electoral politics of it all. Since then, from that small press conference that we had in New York City, we've grown to like 300,000 members and supporters across the country. We are really committed to organizing as sort of our theory of change and the way that we operate. So one of the first programs that we put together was the Veterans Organizing Institute, which is a training, program, multi-day retreat that we host with cohorts of veterans to train them in our model of organizing. And to your question, Will, about like why form another veterans org or why start another organizer training. I think on the organizer training part, we were pretty familiar with what organizer trainings were out there, Midwest Academy, Momentum, various other ones, but none of them really took the like veteran experience into account and sort of like built it into the DNA of the training. And so that was important for us to do. Myself and our now our climate justice director, he was our organizing director, Perry O'Brien, and one of the founding members of Common Defense. We talked about veterans training back in 2008, like the need for something like that. It really didn't come to fruition until 8 years later, but we were able to secure some funding and host our first cohort. It was actually Memorial Day weekend of 2016, and to your other question about like why another veterans org, I think that there's lots of great groups that are out there. Probably in my experience, most vets orgs are sort of focused on like direct service or advocating specifically for veterans issues, veterans health benefits and that sort of thing. And that's great. I fully support that. I'm a disabled vet myself. I benefit from the work of, many of the like legacy veteran orgs that are out there, and even some of the more recent ones like IAVA, great organizations. Vote Vets is another great organization. They do a lot, they endorse veterans that are running for office and, do a great job of like running political ads. I think the value add that we bring as Common Defense is the commitment to organizing and sort of like, we're deeply rooted in a history of grassroots progressive organizing in this country, right? So we are students of the abolition movement. We're students of civil rights movement. We are we understand that if you just dig a little bit under the surface, you will find that in every progressive movement, since the founding of this country, veterans have always been at the forefront, right? So we lift up people like Harriet Tubman, we lift up Cesar Chavez, Medgar Evers, Howard Zinn. All of these folks served in the military, took off their uniform and continue to, fight for the ideals and the values of this country in different ways, right? And continue their service in different ways. And so I think that we felt like there was a space, right? There needed to be sort of a home, a political home for vets that identified as progressives. And I mentioned other organizations before, like Vets for Peace. I think they're doing, they've been around for, over 30 years at this point. I think what's different for us is, we're not limited to C3, right? We've got a 501c3, a C4, and a PAC, right? It's just sort of full court press. And I think, applying some of the lessons that I learned, over the years, being a member, active member of the anti-war movement, I think hopefully, doing things in Common Defense, whether it's trying to end the forever war or any other campaign that we work on, just bringing a, deep strategic analysis, being intersectional in the work that we do, and trying to build a grassroots organization that actually like fully represents the diversity that the U.S. military, represents on a regular basis. I think that's the other thing that when you look at some of the older vets orgs, they tend to be older membership, mostly white, mostly male in terms of their leadership, right? And so I think that we're trying to do things a little different. We often say like we're not your grandfather's veterans organization. We try to approach the work in a way that when you see a staff person or a member of Common Defense talking, they sort of represent the full diversity of not only the military but of our nation in general. I don't know if Naveed has anything to add to that.
No, I think you said it well, Jose. Like there are, I'm really glad Common Defense exists, and I know for a fact that we have made a difference in a lot of folks' lives. Like I said, I did this work for some of the legacy veterans groups before I came to Common Defense. And one thing I learned, saw very quickly after coming to Common Defense was we would meet veterans, who told us, like, I served in Vietnam and I came back and I took off my uniform and never talked about my service again until you guys came along. And, so finding folks like that who felt like they didn't have a place in a political home in this world, I think was a huge service that we were able to do, and we're glad to do it.
Thank you both very much. That's it's really, I think it's helpful for us to see. I know in poll after poll after poll, over doctors, over police, over teachers, the most trusted demographic is veterans, and so it's a really important group to have organized, and it is important to have a full toolbox. The 501c3 educational nonprofit can do grassroots organizing and education work, but really has to shy away from the political side of things. And so having that full court veterans group, I know from my perspective, is really helpful knowing that I've got that ally. So it is about time to move into Q&A, and the way we usually do that is folks can either put their questions in the chat and I'm happy to read them off, or you can use the hand raise function in Zoom, or put a star and asterisk in the chat, and I will call on you, and you can unmute yourself and ask a question yourself. And I'll open with Amy's question, which is, most people tend to think that veterans have conservative ideas. Is it your experience that that you're in the minority with your views, or are we misled about who veterans are?
I can start by saying that's a great question, Amy. We actually have a document called The Myth of the Conservative Veteran, where we sort of lay out the argument about the fact that it's true. Most people assume if you served in the military, you have conservative views, right? And I think that part of what we try to do with our narrative strategy is to undo a little bit of that myth. It's a complex set of reasons as to why that is the case. Everything from, how the military does recruitment, Hollywood versions of what the military and veteran experience is like. But also, again, going back to Will's question, is there an organized presence of progressive veterans that people are, is sort of like a household name? And I think that there are other allied orgs out there, such as Vote Vets. I think that is doing some of that work and has been since about 2005. But what we try to do is organize the veteran constituency that we think fits into a set of progressive values that sort of guide our work. There's only about 18 million vets that are alive today. About a third of them vote consistently Democratic. Another third vote independent, and the other third is about votes on the right pretty consistently. So first and foremost, we just have to start organizing that third of veterans that we know are at least left of center, right? That are voting consistently Democratic. So let's say that's about somewhere between 4 to 6 million people. Independents is a big group in the middle that can sort of swing either way, right? Depending on the political winds. So that would be the sort of next stage of folks that we want to organize. And I think that when we are doing this work with veterans, we always try to start with the common ground, right? Like, there are a set of values that I think not only define who we are as a nation, but also, that veterans understand what their service was, the oath that they took when they decided to serve in the military. And, there are many instances where we find ourselves, as part of like bipartisan coalitions, right? And so we want to ensure that we are putting a message out there that I think will appeal to as broad a base as possible, right? We could try to be, as far left as we can, but I think then we're sort of missing a lot of people who are sort of, closer to the center or sort of straddling the fence. It doesn't mean that we, water down our beliefs or our values, but I think it's just we try to be strategic about how we approach reaching and recruiting the veteran constituency. Some people criticize us because we have the American flag in our logo, right? But I think that from our perspective, that is an extremely important symbol in this country, and that's not ground that we want to cede to the right. And so I think that we intentionally chose the American flag as part of our logo to sort of reclaim some of that, right? The same flag that was, at January 6th attacking the Capitol is also the same flag that flew over the civil rights movement when folks were, registering people to vote, right? And so I think that we have to contest the ground on, the ground on which these symbols stand. And, so far it's been going pretty well in terms of growing this organization from a handful of us to, hundreds of thousands of people that support the organization. So I think we're on the right track. There's always, more to do and more to learn, but, I think that, the veteran constituency is complex. They don't only care about foreign policy. They don't only care about veterans issues. I think vets are whole people that have children and need jobs and houses and healthcare, and we try to understand the vet as like well-rounded, holistic people, right, who have multiple issues that they care about, and you can put on one hat one day and a different hat another. But at the end of the day, that common ground of having served in the military, I think, is a really powerful place to start.
Thank you. So I'm going to share a comment from Heidi Dragneff. She says the military has so many things that Republicans constantly rail against: free healthcare, free college, free housing, free food. And that's while you're in, certainly, and then out, there's some money for college. There's I get my healthcare from the VA, and so I just think that's something to point out, that just a comment I wanted to say. I don't know if either of you wanted to respond to that, but there's a question I can move to if not.
Naveed, do you want to take it?
No, I think Heidi got it covered.
Great. So next question's from Chris Hansen. He wants to know if Common Defense has done any work in counter recruitment, getting into schools or countering the pitch of recruiters and JROTC.
We don't currently do any of that. I have done tons of that when I was active with Vets for Peace and Iraq Vets Against the War. I lost count on the number of high schools I've talked at, different classes, even colleges that I've spoke in. I think the certainly like stopping feeding the machine is an important, bucket of work. Frankly, what we have focused on in Common Defense over the last 5 years is mostly federal legislation and federal electoral stuff. That's sort of just been where we gravitated. I think first and foremost starting with Trump, but then just understanding what our role in the ecosystem is. And I'm sure that there are Common Defense members who are on this call, like Albie and Heidi. I know Albie is also a member of Vets for Peace. And so, we're not territorial in Common Defense in terms of vets are going to join multiple veterans organizations, and that is totally cool. You can own multiple t-shirts and multiple hats and, put them on when necessary. So, frankly, I would say if folks are interested in doing counter recruitment or, countering JRTC programs, maybe a better place to do that is Vets for Peace, because they have a longer history of doing that. They have a lot of energy around that. I know they have a committee. They staff the GI rights hotline and all of that good stuff. I think that the role that we're trying to play in Common Defense, and it doesn't mean that we can't do that or won't do that kind of work in the future. I think that we try to be strategic about filling gaps that might not be filled, by other vets orgs. doing work on the federal legislation, federal elections. I think with the climate work, we're going to start doing more like state-based and local partnerships with organizations and try to organize vets around that kind of stuff. And we'll see what the outcome of the midterm elections are, but maybe federal legislation won't be an option for a couple of years, right? And so that in that situation, then we would shift gears to doing more state-based work.
So there's a question from Ernie, and it might be a short answer. But do you work in support of U.S. Senate candidate in Iowa, Michael Thane Franklin, former director of POW MIA accounting agency? Is that a candidate you've endorsed or are working on or know of?
Yeah, we know of him. Unfortunately, we don't have a strong membership base in Iowa right now, so we did not endorse in that race or try to work on it yet. We have a lot of base building to do in 2023.
So I'm going to move to Amy's second question in a second, but I wanted to pull up Albie's comment here, which is, I represent multiple veterans organizations at both the local, state, and federal level. But when politicians hear common defense, they get excited, which is interesting. I mean, Jose, you said you're a lifetime member of Vets for Peace. I also am, and a former board member of Vets for Peace. And it's good to know that common defense has that that gravitas in lobbying meetings. Hopefully, that's something that we at Peace Action can use to bring to bear in the future too. So moving to Amy's question, which is directly relative, many of us have worked with and admired Vets for Peace for years. And can you speak more about your connection to them? And I don't know, Naveed, if you have a connection to Vets for Peace.
I don't. Unfortunately, I missed the boat on Vets for Peace.
Still there. You can still join.
Yeah. In fact, I don't know if they still have a boat, but they literally have a boat, like a peace boat. Well, here's what I'll say about VFP. So, frankly, I wouldn't be doing this work now if it wasn't for the mentorship that I received as a member of VFP. I go all the way back to the Dave Klein days. He was the VFP president when I first joined. Iraq Vets Against the War also started at a VFP convention, right? So, members, individual Iraq vets joined VFP, met each other at a VFP conference, and then decided, let's form our own thing called Iraq Vets Against the War. And I think that had a lot to do with many of the folks in VFP were also members of Vietnam Vets Against the War, right? So we're talking decades of veteran organizing over the years that have sort of influenced each other. And I think that's one of the things I love most about doing veterans organizing is like, I could meet a Korean War vet and have an immediate connection with that person just by virtue of the fact that we both wore the uniform at one point. We all got, probably in the case of the Vietnam vets and Korean War vets, they might have been drafted, but nevertheless, we've all gone through processing into the military, going to basic training, getting job training, going to your first duty station, some of us getting deployed overseas. It's just a unique experience that you have having served in the military. And so, meeting some of the vets from older vets from VFP, VVAW, and a bunch of other different organizations, DAV and what have you. I think that how I relate to VFP is sort of like, that's where I sort of came up in organizing work. And I think that what's great about VFP is that they have a lot of autonomy within their chapters, and so are able to work on a wide range of issues, right? But ultimately, it all sorts of comes together at the national convention, right? Where you sort of you see the full array of what VFP members are working on, not only across the country, but many of them are doing work internationally. Many of them are still doing work on Agent Orange, many decades after their service, which I think is extremely important, leading delegations back to Vietnam, still connecting with the Vietnamese people. And a lot of the VFP members that I've met also did work in Latin America and were part of, anti-apartheid movements. And many of them, after being part of the anti-war movement, got involved in labor struggles, right? And organizing in post offices across the country and all of that. And so for me, it's, even though I haven't, been to a VFP convention lately, but I still have, a lot of deep love and admiration for the folks that are there, and many of the people that I met, people like Michael McPherson, Susan Schnall, just so many great leaders that I've met in VFP that I sort of, consider like mentors. We haven't worked together collaboratively on as organizations. I think there's still room for that. One of my closest friends from Iraq Vets Against the War, Garrett Reppenhagen, is now the executive director, of VFP, and he and I served on the IVAW board together. So, it's all part of one big family, right? A bunch of like vets, progressive vets on the left. We're all, interested in doing different kinds of work. Sometimes we have beef with each other because we're, one of us is focused on one thing and the other thinks we should be doing some other thing. And that's fine. That's part of movement work. But, ultimately, I think that the door is always open, certainly, on the common defense side, to collaborate with our brothers and sisters in other vets orgs.
So there aren't a ton of questions right now, so I'm going to take the opportunity to push us into the AUMF as a legislative goal. It's so Friends Committee on National Legislation, which I think is a group that a lot of peace organizations or leftist organizations who work in foreign policy take a lot of lead from. They're a really professional organization. They always pick one issue to work on every year. And this year, I think it's actually the Yemen War Powers Act, but on and off, it's been the AUMF. And I know that's something that that you've worked on this cycle. Can you say? I mean, one AUMF was sunset, correct? Am I wrong about that?
Yeah. So unfortunately,
go ahead. Talk a little bit about that work. Go ahead. Sorry.
Thanks. Yeah. So unfortunately, we have Senator Kaine, my senator from Virginia, introduced the 2002 AUMF repeal, which is great. We really applaud him for doing that. That's the one. That's the main authorization for the use of military force that's been on the books since 2002. And it was used for the invasion of Iraq, was also used by the former president in the last administration to justify the strike on Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general who was killed in Iraq. And there are many other instances where it has been invoked rather unjustly, because it didn't apply to what the situation was that it was originally created for. And that's the problem with authorizations for the use of military force that have been created in the past, is that they're overly broad. And they're overly broad to allow the president, as commander-in-chief, the discretion to respond to certain situations. But the War Powers Act, the original War Powers Act, already provides for the president to have emergency powers if we are attacked. So what all these things do is end up leaving the door open so that no matter who the president is, they have the power to, start World War III at any moment that they decide. We have been lucky enough, I guess, in some cases where the president hasn't done that. And, we all know how close we came many times in recent memory to this happening. I mean, if who knows where the situation would be if the previous president was in power when Putin decided to invade Ukraine. So the AUMFs are overly broad and have been around for way too long. There has been legislation introduced to try to sunset them. The issue, and this is not just an issue of like left versus right. This has been an issue, with on both sides of the aisle, that our elected lawmakers have been led to believe that in order to repeal the 2002 AUMF, we must at the same time replace it with something else, even if it's something more narrowly drawn. And the problem with that is that, we don't need to provide more justification for war at the time when it's not needed. So if it turns out that we have troops deployed to, what was the number, Jose, like 40 countries around the world, is that necessary? Is that really keeping us safe here at home, or is that putting targets on the backs of our troops? And as what happened in Iraq when Soleimani was killed in that drone strike, the retaliation caused more than 100 American troops to suffer, traumatic brain injuries. Like, why are they still in Iraq? I was there in 2010, and at the time, we were told we are in the drawdown phase. We are leaving this country forever. And here we are, more than 10 years later, still stationed there, still have troops there in harm's way, for no good reason. Not really, deterring anyone from doing anything, nor are they keeping the homeland safe. If anything, we're putting, American lives in danger, if that's the way it needs to be looked at. So I'll stop there. But yeah, there's a lot to say about the AUMFs.
Do you want to add anything to that, Jose? Or
No, I mean, I'll that pretty much covers it. I think that I'm just thankful for people like Barbara Lee and others who have just consistently tried to get those repealed. I think unfortunately in DC, sometimes it's a marathon more than a sprint.
Yeah, for sure. So organizationally, we've had a really tough time figuring out how to message and how to talk about finding a diplomatic solution to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And we found that it's actually something where in our membership, I see more polarization that I'm used to. Usually, peace action members are pretty much in the same place, and we've got people all over the map on this. And I'm wondering how you have navigated that, how Common Defense is messaging around it, how you're reaching out to your members to find out where they are, and what, if any, work you've done on the Hill on Ukraine.
I'll just say quickly, like once things kicked off back in when was that, February, I guess, that we were fortunate to have several folks that we were connected to, basically people that I knew from grad school that were Ukraine experts. So we were able to pull together pretty quickly a panel with 2 academics and then one person who's a political scientist that was actually in Kyiv when they called in on a Zoom call. So I would say that, our approach has been like, let's hear directly from the experts and from the Ukrainians themselves, and sort of follow their lead. And all of these folks had people that they cared about who were in harm's way as the invasion was unfolding. That being said, I think that our membership is probably experiencing kind of similar, trying to thread the needle around wanting to support the Ukrainian people, but obviously not wanting to just cheer for more war and more funding that's going to increase the military's already over inflated budget. On the flip side, we've had members who decided to volunteer and go serve, in the Ukrainian Foreign Legion. So it's a really interesting time. I think that we are, still figuring out what's the best part that we can do. And Naveed's definitely been tracking been part of the foreign policy and coalition conversations more than I have. So I'll let him speak to that.
Yeah, just recently, the Congressional Progressive Caucus released a letter calling for, a more of a focus on diplomacy in the conflict in Ukraine, which is great. And just, I think earlier this week, maybe over the weekend, it seems like all the days are blurring together this election. The administration also, I think the story came out in the Washington Post that they have been gently nudging President Zelensky to get back to the negotiating table, because he's been saying he's not going to negotiate. So I think all sides are, at least everyone on our side is working in concert to try to come to some sort of diplomatic resolution. It's really up to the parties at the end of the day to decide for themselves what they want to do. So we can't force Ukraine to the negotiating table any more than we can force Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table. And we know that they are both, pretty entrenched in what they want, which, from Ukraine's side, they don't want to give any territory to Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir Putin does not want to, give up the ground that he's gained already. So we don't know, much more than that. But we are continuing to also advocate to keep, the U.S. out of it as much as we can. So that is a situation that is unfortunate. It's scary because we know that, the atomic clock has never been closer to midnight. So let's all hope that it comes to a peaceful resolution. That's all we can hope for.
Thanks. That's it's definitely been something that has been a challenge across the peace movement, because there are people who have a lot of different opinions. We also, I know that Common Defense has done some work on Yemen, which is FCNL's main push this year is on a Yemen war powers resolution. Where have you found success with that, and what's your work looked like around the Yemen war powers resolution?
Yeah, sorry, I can tell you that, we worked very closely with the team at FCNL and Demand Progress and quite a few others, on this Yemen war powers resolution. Essentially, if for those who might not know, the war in Yemen has been going on since about 2014. It's essentially a war, that has been not incited, but supported by the Saudi regime in a lot of ways. And the Houthi rebels there are, it's a bad situation by all accounts. And the real issue right now is that it's become a humanitarian crisis of astronomical proportions. I think the campaign that we are in is every 75 seconds, another child dies of hunger because they are on the brink of famine. And they, all the resources that have been put into this war are all going towards weapons and drone strikes and missiles. And it's, becoming a really making a bad situation worse than it could have ever imagined. And really for no good reason, right? Like there's no, unlike Ukraine, which is still not good, but Putin wants to annex parts of the country for himself that he thinks belong to him. In Yemen, there's not even, Saudi Arabia does not want to take parts of Yemen for itself. They just are, perpetuating this conflict because of, at this point, what else could it be but ego? So we have been working with, the Progressive Caucus coalitions and others to put forward this Yemen war powers resolution. I think at this point it's up to, I'm not going to try to guess, we have a couple dozen co-sponsors on the legislation now, which is great. And essentially it would just say that the U.S. is not going to continue to fund the Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen. If we provide them with any arms, they cannot use them for the war in Yemen, which is something we should have done a long time ago. We shouldn't, if we're providing defensive weapons, then we should make sure that those aren't used offensively against civilians in another country.
All right, and this will probably be the last question we have time for. It's from Chris Hansen. He says, you mentioned Common Defense's work on the climate crisis. What does that include? I know it's just getting started, but can you tell us where it stands and what do you think it might look like moving forward?
Yeah, for sure. We polled our members a couple of years ago and asked them, what are the most important issues to you and what do you think Common Defense should be working on? So the top three were defeating Trump and protecting our democracy. The climate was definitely at the top of the list, and ending the forever war, obviously. So yeah, basically end the war, defeat Trump, and protect democracy and climate. We've been, working on the first two for several years. We're just now getting around to the climate piece. but I think that there's a lot of energy among the membership. I think they understand that it's, one of the most important issues facing all of us, and not just in the United States, but globally. And that vets can be, a value add and a force multiplier to, what is already a pretty vibrant ecosystem of organizations that are working on climate and environmental justice work. What our work will look like, as I mentioned earlier, is we are trying to build relationships with like state and local based organizations that already have, climate and environmental justice work up and running. We are trying to start basically a climate justice fellows program with veterans filling those roles. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't necessarily need to start our own separate campaign as Common Defense. I think that, an issue as big as climate is going to take a coalition regardless, right? And so what we want to do, though, is place veteran organizers in climate and environmental justice organizations and have them focus on organizing vets to get involved in whatever campaigns those organizations are already involved in. There may be some instances where we can start new campaigns in partnership with other organizations, and funding and a little bit of luck will determine that. But I think right now, some of the places that we are looking at is the Gulf Coast region. So we're talking to an organization called Taproot Earth that is based there and has been doing work, since Hurricane Katrina. We want to try to hire organizers to basically organize other vets within that area. And I'm sure that the Gulf Coast region has everything to do with energy and production and processing of oil and natural gas. But also there's a lot of vets that live along the Gulf Coast, and there's a lot of military bases along there. So I think that there's an opportunity for us to organize some of those constituencies. I'm learning that there are a lot of vets that work in the energy industry, and that some of those corporations target military personnel to work on oil rigs and work in different factories and that sort of thing. And so I think that there's some opportunities potentially for us to identify some whistleblowers and folks that are willing to sort of speak out against the industry. And also we may be doing some deep dive work in Houston, the city of Houston in particular, where a lot of the energy sector corporations are based. So we want to do a combination of climate work as well as some voting rights and democracy defense work there. So that's what it looks like so far. We're in the middle of a strategic planning process, so we'll sort of iron out more of those details. But that's the beginning of it, and we've been fortunate enough to find some funders who think that this veteran angle could be a good value add to the overall effort for climate and environmental justice.
Well, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Naveed and Jose, for coming on tonight. It was a pleasure to have you. Definitely thank you also for your good work. This series will remain free and open to everyone. If anybody feels moved to make a donation, check us out at nhpeaceaction.org/donate. And you can also check out Common Defense. I think it's commondefense.org. Do I have your website right?
.us.
.us. Apologies. Commondefense.us to check out Common Defense. Our next few programs, 2 weeks from today, November 21st, we'll have Peter Kelman, who some of you might have been here when we had him for a discussion on the complicated solidarity between labor unions and the anti-war movement. His presentation in a couple weeks is going to be Disconnecting Work and War. A couple weeks after that, December 5th, we will have a discussion with Amy Antonucci, who chairs our events committee, and Sandra Yarney, who's also a board member. They're going to talk about the dignity model. Or is that the books? No, that's a conversation. December 19th, we're going to have Brandon LeMay. That's close to the longest night of the year, and we always do something to recognize Homeless Memorial Day around that time of year. Brandon works in housing justice for Rights and Democracy New Hampshire, and his presentation will be on homelessness and housing justice. So stick with us and watch for our Friday e-blasts that will keep you apprised of upcoming events. Thanks again. Oh, and do check out the chat if you on your way out. There are a bunch of good links. I know Ernie shared a bunch. So thank you both for being here, and thank you everyone for coming. Good night.